Okay, so welcome to Prenatal Nutrition for a Healthy Mom and Healthy Baby. My name is Megan Rowe. I'm a registered dietitian and I am manager at St. Jude Wellness Center. And we are going to go over a lot of the basics of eating healthy for pregnancy, making sure that you're healthy as mom and that baby is healthy inside of you. So this is just a general guideline. I start here because everyone always has questions about how much weight they should gain. These are very, very loose and general guidelines, to be honest. But in general, it kind of depends on what your weight status was before you got pregnant. Anywhere from 28 to 35 is typically considered a good, healthy amount of weight gain for most women. And I just think this is interesting. It has nothing to do with how you eat, but where does the actual weight go? Most of it is in the fetus. And it's just kind of interesting to see what your body does here. There's 1.8 pounds of just amniotic fluid, which is kind of cool. Your uterus is 2 pounds. So it's not just baby weight. It's not just fat weight. It's all going to different areas. So eating for two tends to be a very common thing that we hear, but I think it's really important to remember that your baby is the size of a fruit. So if you're in the app and it shows you like, here's the size of your fruit this week, and it's so cute, and it's a little grape, and then it turns into a lemon, that's a very small second person. So we hear that phrase, eating for two. But it doesn't necessarily mean two adults or even a child and an adult. We are eating for two entities, but that second entity is very, very, very tiny. And while it does demand a lot, it doesn't demand necessarily as many calories as you might think. So these are the differences in caloric needs throughout pregnancy. In your first trimester, you actually don't need to eat anything extra, which is good since a lot of times we're feeling nauseous and not wanting to eat at all. Second trimester, you need 3 to 4, excuse me, 300 to 400 extra calories per day. And in third trimester, it's 300 to 500 extra calories per day. So that's really kind of like an extra big snack, maybe a mini meal. It's not double what you're currently eating. It's not even necessarily 1.5 what you're currently eating. It's just sort of a little bit extra. So why is it so important to think about the food itself? Because I'm going to move away from calories and I'm going to move away from weight for the rest of this presentation. We're going to talk about the actual types of foods, the carbohydrates, the proteins, the fats, how to put them together. And it's really important for several different reasons. One is taste exposure. And I think this is really an important thing to think about. It's not just your weight and baby's weight and the health of baby. It's the exposure to flavors and food that your baby is experiencing because they develop little taste buds at 28 weeks. And I think that's so cute. They have little taste buds. They're actually tasting what you're eating because they can test this in your amniotic fluid. They can see differences in garlic when there's like strong Indian flavors versus strong Asian flavors. There are differences in how the fluid tastes that baby is eating. And that does translate to how baby experiences food later in life. It also translates into breast milk. So later on, if you decide to breastfeed, your diet will translate into different flavors for baby, which again, create this flavor experience that will help them with food later on down the road. Babies also suck and swallow 800 to 1,000 milliliters of amniotic fluid in that final trimester. So they're experiencing a lot of flavor. Baby weight is important when it comes to your food. Neonates had 25 grams more fat mass when mom had a low quality diet, independent of mom's weight status. So this had nothing to do with BMI. It was just looking at the quality of food, and neonates still had more of the unhealthy fat if mom had a low quality diet. We also see micronutrient issues that correlate to baby's weight. But honestly, what I see more anecdotally is that the micronutrient issues relate more to mom because baby is a pretty good little parasite. Baby will usually take what baby needs and take it away from mom if your diet is not healthy enough. Which kind of goes to that one right below it is maternal recovery. When your diet is high in protein, healthy fats, and antioxidants, we see a much more significant turnaround in your recovery. You're recovering faster. You're recovering more gently. You're not feeling this cascade of hormones quite as much. You're having more energy levels that come back more quickly. Obviously, that those first couple of weeks, even though those first 3 months are tough on fatigue in general, but you will recover faster if your diet is high quality. And then breastfeeding can also be impacted by what you eat during pregnancy. Diets that were high in fructose, or AKA sugars, and low in fiber and low in omega-3s had less biodiversity in breast milk in the first 3 months of life, meaning they were not as healthy for baby. So let's go through those different categories. We call them macronutrients. Macronutrients are the main categories of food that give us energy. So those are our carbs, proteins, and fats. So we'll start with carbohydrates. Carbs are should be 30 to 40% of our daily calories. So it's a big number. And if you are used to eating low carb for any number of reasons, this may seem like a lot, but it's something to keep in mind that your carbohydrate needs increase about 15% during pregnancy. So even if you're used to a lower carb style of eating, you need more for the energy needed to create new life inside of you. You just simply need more carbohydrate. Typically, this looks like anywhere from 135 to 175 grams per day. It's really going to depend on your own body. So that's why I put the percentages there. What are you typically eating? 30 to 40% of that should be carbohydrate. The thing to keep in mind with carbohydrate is the fiber, and the glycemic index, or how much it increases your sugar, is very, very, very important. It's important to how you feel and experience the energy from that carbohydrate, and it's important to helping out with gestational diabetes, whether that's helping to prevent it or helping you to maintain a healthy lifestyle if you do happen to have gestational diabetes. Either way, no matter what, all pregnant women have insulin resistance because we are dealing with lots of blood flow and lots of hormonal changes. So whether or not you have gestational diabetes, it's really important that you look at how your body responds to carbohydrates, which means that we need to be eating high fiber carbs. What does that mean? If you're reading a label, that means more than 3 grams of fiber per serving and less than 10 grams of sugar per serving. In general, you don't even need to worry about those numbers if you're eating whole real foods. So starchy vegetables, corn, potatoes, beans, squash, these are all really high fiber sources of carbohydrate. Whole grains. So instead of white rice and brown rice, think wild rice, think quinoa, millet, buckwheat, barley, these truly kind of really almost chewy grains. These ones are the ones that are going to have a lot more fiber and a lot less sugar, especially if you then pair them with other things. And then fruit is a really good source of high fiber carbohydrate. The thing with carbs is, to that last little bullet point there, don't eat them alone, not alone like by yourself. Don't eat them on their own. Eat them with protein and or fat. That is what will help you to balance them out. So if you have watermelon, instead of just watermelon, can you have watermelon with a handful of nuts? Can you have watermelon with a string cheese? Can you have watermelon alongside a meal that includes chicken and vegetables? The fiber, the protein, and the fat help balance out the carbohydrate blood sugar spike you will experience from eating a carbohydrate, which we want. We want a little bit of a spike because that's the energy. We just don't want it to go too high because that's where we get into insulin resistance, especially for already at risk of things like gestational diabetes. So anytime you're having cereal, crackers, bread, rice, fruit, squash, corn, anything that's a carbohydrate, you should always be thinking, how do I partner that? Can I partner that with some nuts, some chicken, some tofu, some beans, any protein or fat? Or can I partner with a bunch of fiber, a big old salad, for instance? So it depends on, how your body's feeling in that moment, what you have access to, but that will always help with the spike of the sugar from your carbohydrate. The next macronutrient is protein. Protein, instead of giving percents, I kind of like to give numbers on this one because it really does matter how much you weigh and where in your pregnancy you are, because those needs just keep increasing. Technically, the RDA, which is the recommended daily allowance, is 1.1 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight per day. That is minimum maintenance. That is to prevent deficiency. What studies are now showing over and over and over again is that is not optimum. So that's your minimum if you don't have access to a lot of food, if you are just really struggling with the nausea, but truly for optimum protein, because our protein needs go up 40 to 75% when we're pregnant because of all of that growth and development that's happening, we need more. So in your second trimester, you should be aiming for 1.22 grams per kilogram of body weight per day. And in your third trimester, it goes up to 1.52 grams per kilogram of body weight per day. So you're looking at over 100 grams of protein every single day, which especially in second trimester probably won't be too hard because you'll probably start getting really hungry at that point. Sometimes third trimester, that can be tricky because we're just getting more and more exhausted and we get less hungry, but those are what we should be aiming for. So really leaning on high quality proteins, especially if you don't have a huge appetite. High quality proteins are really your best source is an animal product because those are the most absorbable protein. I realize that not everyone wants to eat animal product, or it might not seem very appetizing. So you can have beans. Tofu is a great source of vegetarian protein, even protein powders. But some of my favorites, some of these animal proteins, Greek yogurt or kefir, because they give you probiotics. Cottage cheese is an amazing source of protein because you don't need very much and you can blend it into things too if you don't like the texture, like a smoothie. Eggs are probably one of the best superfoods for pregnancy there is because they also, in addition to being high sources of protein, have all kinds of cool B vitamins in the yolk. Something called choline that you may have heard of helps prevent many different types of deficiencies in baby. And one egg yolk has half your choline needs for the whole day. Grass-fed meat, pasture-raised poultry, wild fish. Obviously, you don't have to get the grass-fed or the pasture-raised or the wild, but you're going to get the better nutrition breakdown from these things. And then I have a picture of bone broth there in the corner too. Don't underestimate bone broth as a really great source of protein, especially when you're feeling nauseous or especially when you just don't have a big appetite. You can get a lot of good quality protein from a bone broth, and then you just get to drink it down, and it's really, really readily absorbed. Fats we want to be about a third-ish of our daily calories. I don't want you to go on a fat-free diet. Now is not the time to be getting rid of fats. We really need them for our hormones. Our hormones are actually created and made of fats and cholesterol, and baby needs that fat so badly for all of baby's development. So don't be afraid of fats. Just really try to lean on the more health-promoting fats, being your olives, olive oil, avocados, avocado oil, nuts and seed butters, these real food fats as opposed to processed food oils where there's a lot of omega-6s. So leaning on olive oil, avocado oil, and coconut oil as your main sources of added fat, not so much canola oil and grapeseed where we can get some inflammation there. And always reading your labels for 0 grams of trans fats and avoiding the word hydrogenated. But basically, if every single meal you eat has about a handful of protein and like a tablespoon or so of fat, and the rest is those high fiber carbs, so another handful, that's a really well-balanced meal that's going to balance your blood sugars and give you enough energy and to sustain. And then fiber. Fiber is carbohydrate. Carbohydrates are fiber, but I kind of like to talk about fiber in its own special category just because it's so incredibly important. It's important for your bowel movements, for constipation that's really common with pregnancy. It's really important for our whole gut microbiome, all the bugs and the probiotics that are in there that we are giving to baby. It's also important for managing your blood sugar and managing blood pressure. So fiber is crucial for pretty much everything across the board. We're looking for 25 to 35 grams per day of fiber. Most Americans get about half that. And it can be easier to get than you think. So my favorite examples of forgotten fiber sources are a third of an avocado, 2 tablespoons of coconut flour, or 2 tablespoons of nuts. All of these very small amounts have 5 full grams of fiber. So if you have all 3 of those in a day, you're already at 15 grams of fiber just from those little bits of sort of plant foods. Try and get 4 to 5 cups of vegetables every single day. That will also help you meet that need. And when you're reading a label for cereal, crackers, any sort of bready or carbohydrate substance, look for at least 3 grams of fiber. So back to that carbohydrate rule, the more the merrier. These are what I consider superfoods for pregnancy. Keep in mind, there's no best food out there, but some of these have some nutrients that we tend to be low in or that we tend to need more of when we're pregnant. Number 1 across the board is eggs. And I realize this is hard to get if you are following a vegan diet, but eggs are just such a superfood as far as they're the whole package. So you get the protein, you get the omega-3s, especially if they're pasture-raised eggs. You're also getting that choline, like I talked about. You're getting folate, you're getting all the B vitamins in that egg as well, plus vitamin D and vitamin C and vitamin A. So they're just a really good package. Beans and lentils are one of my favorite plant-based proteins because you also get tons of fiber. You also get a little bit of the B vitamins. So you're getting protein and carb all mixed together in this perfect package. Kale and spinach are some superfood in the green categories because they have lots of antioxidants that are so crucial for our inflammation. Wild salmon for its omega-3s, berries for antioxidant and fiber, plus they're low glycemic when it comes to fruit. Bone broth or beef stew, we kind of talked about that as being just such an incredible source of protein, but it also is a good source of something called glycine. And that's an amino acid that helps with general inflammation, but also the kind of the development of all of our micromolecules. So the inner lining of our gut is made of glycine, our tendons are made of glycine. So it can help with that development of the physical structure of the baby inside of you. Bone broth I also like because you can throw everything else in there too. You can throw in onion peels and garlic, and you can throw in things like seaweed to get all these other nutrients that maybe you don't have the appetite for. Seaweed. It is recommended that, or it is estimated, sorry, that our iodine needs go up by about 50% when we're pregnant. And iodine is hard to get unless we're eating a lot of salt or a lot of sea vegetables. So seaweed is excellent. You can munch on those seaweed paper wraps as a snack. I like to put canned salmon inside of it and pretend like it's sushi. But you could also throw in seaweed into a bone broth. Avocado has that fiber that we were looking at, plus really good sources of fat. Sauerkraut or any fermented vegetable has good fiber for our gut, but also probiotics that are good for our gut. And then yogurt or kefir. When we're pregnant, we always want to lean on the full fat, just keeping the portion size down if weight is a concern. And then supplements, I'm assuming anyone listening to this is already taking a prenatal. Consider prenatals, just a plug for later once baby is born, consider prenatals all the way through to menopause, because prenatals are not to get us pregnant. Prenatals are for the body of a woman during the time where she can get pregnant. Whether you decide to get pregnant or not, I tell 15-year-olds to start taking prenatal vitamins because it's not for pregnancy, it's for your body at this stage of life. Obviously, when we have a baby on board, then it's even more important. And sometimes the quality I focus more on during pregnancy than I do outside of pregnancy. Just gonna put that up. Sorry. So these are some of my favorites that are really high quality prenatal vitamins. So we have Fullwell. Fullwell is probably my favorite one out there. They also have specifically in omegas for pregnancy, and they have a men's fertility. There's one called Weenatal. Thorn Basic is a really good one that can be a little bit gentler on the stomach. Pure Encapsulations has a prenatal. Seeking Health has a powder that does not include iron. So if anything having to do with iron or anemia is a concern, you wouldn't want this one. But oftentimes iron in the prenatal can be what triggers some nausea. So if that's happening for you, you might want one of these gentler powders that don't include the iron, and just take that and like through second trimester until you need more of the iron. Metagenics also has one. And then there's also some packs out there. Other things to consider outside of your prenatal is also fish oil. Most of us in the United States are not getting enough omega-3s unless you're eating wild fish several times a week. And if you're pregnant, you may not have any appetite for fish at all, depending on who you are. So you may want to be taking a fish oil if you're anti-fish, or even just the smell kind of puts you off, because that you can be super sensitive to smells when you're pregnant. You can also look for a vegan source of omega-3s, but it's really important for our inflammation. Vitamin D3 is pretty much a part of every single process of the body in and outside of pregnancy. So it's a good thing to consider. If you're anemic, you may want an additional iron. If you are someone who shows up low on calcium, you may need that. I don't recommend calcium for every single mama. Just know that it can be common for calcium to be low in some women. Magnesium, if you are having lots of cramping, if you're having trouble sleeping, or if you are really struggling to handle stress, magnesium can be incredible for that. And you can even take an Epsom salt bath, which is lovely in and of itself. But definitely look into that for all those three reasons. And then probiotics, if you were sick, if you had to take antibiotics for any reason, you may want to consider probiotics as well. And fluids, so important. There is a lot moving around in your body right now. Your body's trying to push blood all over the place and fluids all over the place, and it's just harder to do now that there's extra weight on board and now that your organs have all been pushed off to the side. So water is even more important than it was before you got pregnant. 8 to 10 glasses is a minimum. What we really want to do is take your weight and divide it in half, and that's how many ounces per day. Just keep up with the water, make them unsweetened to help with that glycemic response. And obviously we know no alcohol. You've probably heard all of these at this point, but just to touch base on foods to avoid or minimize, anything that has a high safety precaution, we want to avoid, because food safety is a higher risk when we're pregnant than when we're not pregnant, because we don't want baby to get any of those types of bacterial infections. So anything that's kind of out for a long time, for more than several hours, buffet food, unwashed fruits and vegetables, anything undercooked or raw, we want to steer clear from. I have that little asterisk there because if it is a high quality food, if you are getting pasture raised eggs, if you know where that fish came from and it happens to be slightly undercooked, even raw, there are lots of cultures in other countries that do eat sushi. I would just make sure that you know the quality of that food source. So maybe don't go to like what I call the sushi go rounds, where they're literally just like on a little conveyor belt and you're picking them up. That would not be a sushi I would choose to eat. You eat that based on your comfort levels when it comes to the quality of them. But I will just say that, there are lots of cultures that show that we don't need to be quite so worried about these things, but definitely if you don't know the quality or the source, avoid. Excess caffeine. You can have some. 1 to 2 cups per day of a caffeinated drink is perfectly fine, and just assess how you're responding. Some women say, oh, you know what, I drank 2 cups of coffee every single morning before I was pregnant, and now I get the shakes. It may just be that because of hormone differences, you're responding a little bit differently. And if you're not feeling good from it, then take it out. But it's not harming baby. Processed foods high in sugar and low in fiber for the glycemic risk that we talked about. So again, more than 3 grams of fiber, less than 10 grams of sugar. Unpasteurized foods for that same reason as the raw or undercooked foods. And you can usually see the word pasteurized on a label. Avoiding alcohol, avoiding artificial sweeteners. So that's your Sweet and Low and your anything in the pink or the blue, little packets on a restaurant table. The reason for this is not necessarily that they cause direct harm, but we see now from studies that artificial sweeteners completely change your microbiome structure. They mess with the ratios of good bacteria to bad bacteria. And anytime we're messing with your microbiome, we're messing with baby's microbiome. And we just don't know what that does yet. All we know is we want a good, healthy variety of the microbiome, that artificial sweeteners mess with that. So I would recommend avoiding them during pregnancy. And then anything high in mercury from fish. So that's your swordfish, shark, mackerel, and tilefish. You can have some tuna. It's kind of like the caffeine recommendation where just minimize it. Don't have too much. 6 ounces a week is perfectly fine. Oh, and I circled that little Oreo package where it says sugar-free. Anytime you see a sweet food that says sugar-free, so clearly an Oreo is going to be sweet, but it says sugar-free, that should be your red flag that it probably has artificial sweetener in there, because they have to sweeten it with something. So what can you eat? All of these things. These are all examples of 400 to 500 calorie meals. Some of them a little bit less. Edamame is definitely less. But remembering that that's kind of our goal is 300 to 500 calories in the 3rd trimester, 300 to 400 calories in the second for extra food. So things like bean tacos. I think a lot of people ask me, especially these days, well, what about plant-based eating? You recommend all these animal foods, but I really am trying to eat more plant-based. You can do that. We just want to look at the glycemic response, because a lot of plant-based foods tend to be higher in carbohydrate. So those tacos over in the corner, make sure there's lots of avocado in there, and maybe we sprinkle in some feta cheese and we have a high fiber tortilla instead of just beans and rice, for instance. Even that baked potato there, my baked potato is one of my favorite recommendations if you're feeling really queasy and nauseous, because it just kind of feels easy to eat, but it is very high carbohydrate. So can you balance that out with just a little bit of sour cream? Even better if you get Nancy's brand or Good Culture, because they're fermented sour cream. So now you're getting a little probiotic and just that little bit of extra fat to balance out the carbohydrate of the potato. Edamame, world's most beautiful snack because it's fiber and it's protein and it's a little bit of fat all in one, and it's salty, so it tastes good, and it gives us a little bit of that iodine from the salt. Smoothies are another one of my favorites for pregnancy, especially when we're nauseous or we're just not feeling hungry, but we know we have to get something in our tummies. Liquids can be really easy for that, but make sure you're adding protein or fat to all the fruit in that smoothie, so you're not just getting a spike of your blood sugar. So protein powders, great. Avocado mixes into smoothies really well. Yogurt, even tofu, you can throw into a smoothie. A banana and peanut butter, beautiful. Toast with egg on top. Salmon with some lentils. Anything with soup, like a chicken soup with vegetables, is so nourishing. Egg bakes, and then yogurt parfaits. All good examples of extra things that you can have. And I just kind of want to point out old school recommendations versus new recommendations. And I'm going to give you some resources on this too. Old school would say, if you found any kind of resources on prenatal nutrition meal plans, from the 90s and early 2000s, it would probably say oatmeal with orange juice and a toast. Whoa, that is going to give you a blood sugar spike like crazy. We have to balance those out. So even though that's healthy food ingredients, it's not balanced the way we want it to be. So over on the right is a much more nutrient dense meal for a pregnant mama. Eggs with smoked salmon on avocado toast, or eggs with some potatoes and a lot of vegetables. You can have oatmeal, but let's make sure that there's some protein powder mixed in that oatmeal, or yogurt, and we have flax seeds and nuts on top, and we're not having it with an orange juice. So I want to quickly kind of go over some common concerns during pregnancy and how we can address those with nutrition. One is, it's not always morning sickness, as a lot of you probably know. It's sickness all day, or mine was always at night, but nausea in general. So here are some ideas to help with that. Try things like Preggy Pops or tummy drops. These are just things you suck on, and the ingredients are good and they're not super high sugar. Avocado can be really helpful. It's that softness that's easier to eat than chewing on something, but you're getting fiber. And a lot of times the queasiness starts because there's not a whole lot of digestion happening. So that can help a lot. Gelatin. So you can make your own little Jello pops, and you just mix gelatin with your favorite juice or even with bone broth, pop them in a little ice cube container and put them in the fridge, and you can just kind of suck on some gelatin and you're getting good protein there. C-bands, so you could try motion sickness remedies. Raspberry leaf is very, very helpful. There's a product called B natal, which is a higher dose B vitamin substance. That's a little cup of bone broth there in the middle. Sometimes noshing on nuts can be helpful. Cashews or pistachios, just slowly chewing. And some people, it's funny, I put chicken on here and I find it's a 50-50. Some moms are like, oh, absolutely no meat or poultry at all. And some do really, really well with kind of the blandness of chicken. Avoid motion, bright lights, loud noises, adverse climate conditions. If you're really hot, that can kind of just keep on triggering nausea. Any food odors, so maybe you have to have a husband or mom or someone else cook for you. Lemon can block the smell of what's going on in the kitchen, and then obviously avoid whatever is inducing that nausea. Heartburn, lovingly known as GERD, very, very common because you have something sitting there right in your gut that's pushing things back up. Things you can try: lemon water before you eat can kind of help trigger some of that acid to be created before you eat so that it's ready to break down food. Fiber, so things like salads before you eat. You can try digestive enzymes. Those can be really helpful, especially about 30 minutes before a meal. Papaya has a digestive enzyme in it, so you can try having papaya before you eat or after. Ginger tea. Apple cider vinegar, you can have that before a meal, like a shot of it. You can also try elevating your head. Avoid tight clothing, hot or spicy or deep fried. Carbonation can actually trigger some excessive GERD, and then big processed meals. Constipation, unfortunately, very common. We can be proactive in preventing it by eating all that fiber that we talked about. But once it's there and you're feeling constipation, some other things that you can try are taking some probiotics. taking a shot of flax oil. So we're talking like a teaspoon or so, because it kind of helps lube up the works. Dates and prunes are very helpful. In fact, any of the pea fruits, so pear, prune, peach, papaya, these are all foods that have a certain type of soluble fiber that help kind of push poop through. Chia seeds or chia pudding broth can be helpful. And something I don't have on here that I need to add next time is there's a supplement called Heather's Tummy Fiber, and it's a fiber powder that's very useful for constipation and very safe during pregnancy. And then finally, anemia can be a concern. Usually that is more of a concern later on in the pregnancy, not something as much early unless you have struggled with anemia earlier in your life. Protein, protein, protein. Have protein every single time you eat, which you should be really doing anyway to help with your glycemic response. Eat a variety of colored fruits and vegetables. So vitamin C takes iron and it pulls it in. They're like best friends. So whenever we have things like oranges and carrots and bell peppers that are high in vitamin C alongside our protein, we're going to absorb that iron better. Try not to have too much milk, because milk can block the absorption of iron. So no more than 3 cups a day. And then make sure that you're taking your prenatal and that your prenatal does include iron by your 2nd or 3rd trimester. These are some of my favorite resources for you. Lily Nichols is a dietitian who has done an incredible amount of research and work with moms, and she wrote a book and she has a website and a blog, and she is where I have gotten a lot of my information from. Really, really good information. She has a very in-depth background specifically on gestational diabetes as well. Aviva Romm is one of the well-known experts in the nutrition and overall functional health world for prenatal, during pregnancy, postpartum, and even for menopause. She's kind of just like a women's health functional practitioner. And then the PCOS dietitian, she focuses specifically on PCOS, but has a lot of good information around PCOS with hormones, and that includes during pregnancy and after pregnancy. And then resources for you here at St. Jude Wellness Center. In addition to this webinar, we also have some programs. We have a prenatal wellness program that's a 2-week class, or a 2-week series of 4 classes. It includes doula sessions and yoga sessions, and we offer that about every month, and you can repeat it as often as you'd like. We have pelvic floor Pilates, which you can definitely safely do during pregnancy. It was originally created for after pregnancy to help with pelvic floor recovery, but we find that a lot of mamas do really well by strengthening pre, and that helps with recovering post-baby. We also have mommy baby yoga when you're ready, once baby is here. And then we have dietitian consultations, personal training for pregnancy, and we also do a lot of breath work. We have an excellent yoga therapist who can work on breath work, whether or not you are working with an epidural or a natural pregnancy. Knowing how to breathe through pain and stress is really, really crucial for during labor prep. And that's all of our information there. And this recording is going to live on our website at St. Jude Wellness Center, as well as the St. Jude Medical Center page. So I'm going to turn off the recording and get over to your questions.